Hello there. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Very good. Very good. Yeah. What can I tell you today?
I just had a really short list of questions, so I guess we can go ahead and get started. Um, on the cover of the album To the Bone, as well as the posters and single covers, you've shown your face, something you've avoided in the past until the Transients compilation. On top of that, you've had paint thrown at you, adding bright colors, which seems to have progressed from Hank Naughty Rays in 4.5. What brought you to the artistic decisions with Last Say for the album art?
Okay, I think there was a sense for me that this album was more about my very getting back, and this also reflects on the title, the choice of title, To the Bone, getting back to the very core of my musical personality, getting to the very core of songwriting side of my work, stripping away perhaps some of the more conceptual elements that I've explored over the last couple of records. And so it seemed somehow appropriate to me that I would, in some respects, present myself as a musical personality for the first time through one of my records, rather than kind of not hiding behind, but perhaps relying more on the more conceptual sort of artwork side. This is a very personal record, and you're hearing a lot of, you're hearing a lot of me on the record in terms of the guitar playing, the bass playing, the keyboard playing. A lot of that is me too. The songs, the ideas, the emotions, the subject matter of the songs. I don't know. I just felt it was time, perhaps, to really, acknowledge to myself as much as the audience that there is a strong musical personality here at work, that there is a strong kind of identity, even a visual identity. Some people, instantly recognize the glasses and the hair and the stubble. It's all become part of in some respects, it's become part of my visual trademark, such that people even make fun of it, which is great. When people start making fun, you've almost become like a visual meme, then you kind of acknowledge yourself. Okay, so I do have a strong visual identity, and why not? Why not kind of present that as part of the package? Because it's all part of the same personality at the end of the day.
Okay. How do you feel about potentially going forward and being considered a pop artist, with the idea that some newer fans brought in by this album might gloss over your back catalog largely in favor of current and future materials?
I don't know really, because I've always thought of myself as a pop artist. Pop. Pop is a very broad church. The Beatles were a pop group. And the Beatles made some of the most timeless, organic, sophisticated music of the whole, popular music canon. This is pop music. I've always thought of myself as a pop artist. I've never really thought of myself as being stuck in a genre. If you look at, I've been making records for a long time now, 25 years or something. And if you look at across the whole kind of range of records I've made ambient records, metal records, pop records. But I think part of the issue, I don't want to use the word problem because it's not a problem, or if it is, it's a very nice problem to have. Part of the issue for me has that the records that have been the most successful for me have been the ones that people have tended to categorize as progressive rock. Mm-hmm. But even on those records, there was always a strong pop sensibility at work. I love melodies. I love catchy hooks. I love songs that ultimately you can sit down at a piano or with an acoustic guitar and you can play them and they still stand up. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, I've always felt that I've had this strong pop sensibility to my work. If people see me as an artist that they see me as being someone that makes these very dark, intense, conceptual rock records, then probably this is not the record for them. I may come back to that, at some point, but I reserve the right to explore all of the aspects of my musical personality, and I feel like those aspects have always been there. And this record is certainly one that focuses more on that side of my musical personality.
What took so long for you to focus on this side of your music personality, because I know that you've mentioned before you're fans of like Tears for Fears and Kate Bush and ABBA.
Yeah. Yeah, those things are, I mean, those artists. Listen, I grew up in a house. I was very fortunate. When I was growing up, my parents listened to music a lot. They loved music. And I grew up in a house where I had no concept of musical boundaries and musical snobberies, because my parents would listen to ABBA, and my mum would put on an ABBA record, and then my dad would put on Dark Side of the Moon, and then they might put on a record by the Carpenters, and then they might put on a record by Donna Summer or the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and then my dad would put on Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield or whatever it is. So I was hearing all of this music, and to me it was all magical. It was all magical. And I didn't really understand that one of these artists was very intellectual, conceptual rock, and another of these artists was like pure, pop. To me, it was all incredible. And I grew up very much without this concept of musical genre, and I still feel that way. I don't really acknowledge or understand the idea of working within genre. So to me, the artists that you mentioned, artists like Kate Bush and Tears for Fears and Peter Gabriel and Prince and Bowie, these are all artists that are very hard to put into a box. You can't really say what kind of music Kate Bush makes or David Bowie makes. You can't say it's just pop music or it's rock music, or how, if you don't like the word pop, and I know for some people pop is a very pejorative term. If you don't like, it shouldn't be, but if you really don't like that word pop, then just use the word rock music. But all of these artists are very hard to define beyond that. And I guess I've always seen myself as, rightly or wrongly, as one of those, hopefully one of those artists that can exist almost without having to put me in a genre, a box or a genre or a category.
I would definitely say so, considering your back catalog, doing ambient and metal and everything. How much time did the song? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm interrupting you, but go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. How much time did the songwriting process take for the album? Did the recording take longer than usual since you were experimenting?
The songwriting for me is still the hardest aspect of, well, I was going to say of making an album, but actually the hardest aspect of my whole career, my whole life. Coming up with, this whole idea of taking a blank page, I'm talking metaphorically now, but taking a blank page and filling it, or plucking something out of the air that didn't exist before. This is something I still don't understand quite how it works, why it works, why sometimes it doesn't work, where the music comes from, where the lyrics are. I still don't really understand that process myself. And the writing took probably on and off about a year, and always with me, I write a lot more music than I eventually require, and part of that process is finding the new direction for the new record, and sometimes possibly writing music which felt like it's more like something that could have been on the previous record, and kind of flushing that out of your system so that you can then move on and explore new kind of territory. And that's certainly something that happened with this record. I started off and I wrote a few songs which I felt like were perhaps nothing new for me. It felt like they could have been on the last record, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then eventually, maybe fifth or sixth and seventh song, I started to find a new direction, something that made me excited. And it took me about a year to come up with a bunch of, maybe 15 songs, which I felt like these are ready now to go into the studio and to record. But even then, as you kind of hinted in your question, the recording process was longer. There was more experimentation. I played a lot more of this album myself this time. So the previous couple of records, I had a band, and the band kind of rehearsed the material, and we went into the studio and pretty much recorded it live in a very short period of time. And this time around, I was in the studio for about 2 months and playing a lot more of it myself, experimenting a lot more. So it was a very different process this time. And And again, that's something that keeps it exciting for me and makes each project feel like it's a distinctly different experience than the previous one.
Keeps it more exciting, I would assume.
Yeah, everything that's different, in my career is something that I kind of embrace. And the doing the same thing or repeating myself is, for me, that's the worst thing of all. And I say that with the acknowledgement that there are some artists, and I'm not criticizing them at all for this, but there are some artists who tend to establish a sound or a blueprint, and then they keep kind of refining that same approach over their whole career. You think of a band like AC/DC, for example, who pretty much made the same record for 40 years or so. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Sometimes that's what bands do very well and artists do very well, and it's what the fans kind of respond to. For me, I'm the opposite. I have to feel like every project is something about it that's going to be a journey of, a kind of voyage of discovery, something new, something different, a new challenge, something that's going to make that record have a reason to exist within my back catalogue as distinct from all the other records I've made,
Yeah. Okay. On the album, each song seems to have a counterpart, a soaring song followed by one that grounds it, taking the bird's eye view back to part of our current reality in the instrumental sense, like in the case of Nowhere Now and Pariah or Permeating in Blank Tapes. Was that intentional, or did it just tend to happen that way?
I think there's a bit of both going on, if that's not a contradiction, because I think there's definitely something, when I write songs, I tend to find that I don't just write one song about the same subject. So if I hit on a subject that I want to write about, I find that I will write probably 2 or 3 songs at least. And in some cases, of course, if you go back to my previous record, Hand Cannot Erase, I ended up writing a whole album's worth of songs that were essentially about the same character and the same story. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, a subject that interests you can kind of blossom into a whole record in itself. But even when that doesn't happen, I find that I tend to write these little subgroups of songs. So you're right. I mean, like Detonation and People Who Eat Darkness on this new record are both songs that are written from the perspective of religious fundamentalists and terrorists. And there are other songs on the record that also you could pair them up and say, well, they seem like two sides of the same coin. So I would say that it's something which happens in a natural way, but I'm also aware of it, and I can sometimes, make it more of a conscious thing too. And I like that. I like the fact that there are these kind of clues throughout the record as to how certain songs might connect, and actually the whole record has a kind of underlying theme going on if you choose to find it.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask if there was anything you wanted to say to the fans from World Prog-Nation that are going to be hearing this, just to kind of round out the interview.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm always conscious that the world of progressive rock has a very, they're extremely passionate listeners, and in some respects, that audience sees me as being very much a champion for what they do. And I know some people are concerned when they hear words like pop and maybe they hear some of the songs on the new record. All I would say is approach it with an open mind. There is no sense at all that on this record I have sacrificed any of my sense of ambition. And the songs are just as sophisticated, just as layered, and in many respects just as ambitious as any of my records have been. So I hope that the progressive rock community will approach it with an open mind and really enjoy this record. I'm sure most of them will. Okay.
I know I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. There you go. You know what? I think most people, when most people hear this record, I think they're gonna appreciate that this is really just the next step in my evolution, and really engage with it. So I'm happy to hear you enjoyed it anyway.
Well, thank you so, so much for your time today.
My pleasure. It's been great speaking to you, Christina. Have a great day.